Welcome to Goldfish on Games, where we're going to be diving into the world of video pinball. And while the physical machines are the best, our favourite computer pulled off some great renditions. So let's look at a number of Amiga first or exclusive games as we check out the Amiga's answer to pinball. We start in 1987 with Pinball Wizard, that was published by Kingsoft. This was in that 8-bit style of being a single screen game, as that way you don't have to do any of that complex scrolling. And it's also a single table, but does support up to 4 players, as well as being able to change the speed of the game. Now, despite the single screen nature, there does seem to be a decent amount of things going on. There's plenty of bumpers and buttons for you to hit, and there's even a tube that you have to break through, with each tab broken giving you multiplier bonuses. Everything has sound effects and there's even music. But oh dear, that music. That has to be what, 4 seconds long on loop? Thankfully you can turn it off. The ball physics, well, they're okay. I think it might be a little too bouncy. It doesn't seem to do anything too weird, but it's not always doing what you might expect. But the big issue has to be the flippers. They are way too slow to respond and move, and they don't seem to impart much of an impact to the ball, or at least they don't all the time. Now, I've seen the ball just bounce between the flippers, with you trying to hit it, and it just ignores it completely. It's a shame, as the rest of the game isn't all that bad. I think there might even be a multi-ball feature, as I was able to get a ball locked, but I couldn't work out what you needed to do to activate it. Which might become a bit of a theme in this video, as while I really enjoy pinball, I'm no expert, I'm just a casual enjoyer. But I will try to show off each game to their best. And I've also decided that it would be great to look at these games in the order that they were released, if just to give a sense of how the genre evolved over the years. Which means up next is QuikSilver Pinball Simulation, that was released in 1990 by ActionWorks, and we've seen this game before on a cover disc face-off episode, where we got to play one of the tables and I don't think anyone was impressed. Well, now we get to see the full game, which boasts 4 tables, and we start with Mission to Mars. And while we might have moved on from those single-screen pinball games, it's still not scrolling, as we have this flip screen design, which on its own would really be annoying, but what really lets this game down is the ball physics, as they are bad. Like, massively, massively bad. The ball just randomly speeds up and slows down, and even changes direction on its own. This is normally around entrances to ramps, as it likes to try and drag the ball into these areas. And you can really see how they didn't trust the physics model that they created. Which means it's just a massive cheat to try and make it possible for the ball to travel around those smaller parts. And this honestly might be the worst pinball game of the episode. In the second table, Aztec Sun, we get to see the same basic features, like having 2 sets of flippers, 1 for each screen, which makes sense with each screen being its own mini table, and this one even has what feels like a table within a table. Now overall, it's quite basic in both its looks and what it offers. And it's also worth noting that really weird ambient soundtrack that they've got going on, which really isn't good. I guess it's trying to make this sound like a real table, but when it doesn't look or play like one, having that sound effect constantly going on really does not help their game. The third table is Longhorn, which even has a themed plunger. Now this one is slightly better than the last, with the feeling that there's more going on in both areas. And if you get lucky with how the ball randomly moves, it might even spell out most of the letters along the top for you. And if you see those numbered switches, well, they're quite useful to go for as well, as if you get all 4 of them, then you'll get a score multiplier. And the last table is the game's namesake, QuikSilver, which has this silvery look to it, and you're trying to spell out those letters as well. Now, outside of hitting targets to flip over cards, there aren't too many other things that you've got to do in these tables. And pretty much all the tables have the same basics as well, they just moved them around a little. Even though this was my first introduction to pinball on the Amiga, way back on that Amiga format cover disc, I find it hard to return to this, mostly because of what came next. As in 1992, something would arrive that would change everything, and that was Pinball Dreams. Developed by Digital Illusions and published by 21st Century, this is the game that all after would be judged against. From its presentation to its 4 tables, this was a masterclass at the time. Even if it can look a little simple now. But back then, this was absolutely packed with things for you to do. And those ball physics, they felt amazing after that previous game. The pinball moves around the table correctly, it bounces off stuff nicely, and you can more or less send it exactly where you want it to go. Well, you can if you're better than me. And what's also amazing is the fact that we've got some decent music and sound effects at the same time. And this first table ignition has you trying to spell out its letters, while also trying to fill up the fuel for the rocket. There's even a cheeky skill bonus if you manage to launch the ball and get it into the highlighted switch. The second table is Wheels of Steel, and it's one of my favourites of the game. It looks great with its rail motif going on, and we can see that not only does it look different from the previous table, it also plays different because we have lots of ramps to work with here. And the bottom of the table is also showing all the various stages of the score system. So you will have to progress through all those bits if you want to try and rack up the big numbers. Beatbox is the third table, and like Wheels, it also has a lot of ramps. But it's also got some trick shots and buttons for you to go for. And one of the things that set Dreams apart from everything else was the inclusion of that scoreboard at the top, styled in the way that real pinball machines would have. And with its multi-segment display, it could show numbers and text and even do nice little animations. The final table is Nightmare, and it differentiates itself from all the others by having the ball launched from the middle of the table rather than coming down from the top. With less ramps but more switches, this is much closer to Ignition than the other two. But it also has lots of stages to its bonus system, and as we can see, this was a high watermark for all other games to compete against. And in many ways, quite a few decided not to do that at all. So it's up to Digital Illusions, who sometimes went by another name that didn't really stick, Dice or something like that, to follow it up. And they did so in style, with Pinball Fantasies, which I've actually covered previously in a Pinball Fantasies Deluxe video, which was a PC port. I'll include the link so you can check that out. But here, in its original release, it's an amazing follow-up. It has more complex tables, and even looks great on classic machines. But we also have the AGA release, which improved on the graphics but kept the exact same gameplay, though it did lose the really funky menu. The first thing that you have to notice is the updated score panel, as it changed to this dot matrix style display, and that's resulted in more animations and fancier effects, which we've been seeing on this first table, Partyland, which is a funfair that has lots for you to go for, including skill shots to try and gain extra points off the bat. This is the table that everyone talks about because it's even on the box art. And that's not to say the others are bad. Speed Devils is, well, it's okay, and personally my least liked table in the game, as it feels like there's less things to do on this table. And that might be due to the scoring system, as you have to move up through the gears and the levels, so keeping the ball in the upper area becomes quite important, as well as using that extra flipper up there, which does result in the lower area feeling a little empty, as it's all about telling you where you currently are in the scoring system. Which can feel quite similar when we check out $1 Billion Game Show. But it does have more ramps and even switch blocks for you to deal with, so you will have to pay extra attention to where the ball is currently travelling. And this one also has a mid-table exit for the ball, so there really isn't much of a skill shot for you to be going for. Now, one nice addition is that at the end of the game it will pick a random number, and if it matches up with what you have in your 10 value, then you can get an extra ball. But there's also chances of getting extra attempts on the table itself, but they do tend to be quite tricky to get. The final table is Stones and Bones, another horror-based table, and it's quite the packed one as well, between a very Dreams-like skill shot system with you going for a letter at the top, to having the ramp on the left-hand side, that might look like it's a single one, but it has 2 tracks going through it, one of which leads to a nice set of bonuses if you manage to get it down the left-hand side. It's a fun table, and if you can open up the tower, then you can get some real points. And after taking a break to go make Benefactor, they return to the pinball world with Pinball Illusions, an AGA only game, but this time only boasting 3 tables because the 4th they didn't think was good enough to release. Law and Order is the first, and you can really see where that extra AGA power went, as the table looks great, as does the dot matrix display board at the top, that now has multiple shades, so that you can really pull off some really neat effects and animations on it. Now, one of the things they added to the game were events.
Unit 6 required for situation downtown.
Which will give you a set of ramps for you to target, or some buttons for you to hit, with some nice reactions if you manage to pull it off. These tend to give you the big points, but you will have to work to unlock them first. But if you do get them, they can be a lot of fun. The second table is Babe Watch, which has this mini upper table, as well as a third flipper. The big ticket item for Illusions was the inclusion of multi-ball, and it'd been asked for way back when they announced Fantasies, but DICE decided they needed to come up with a way to make it really work, and their answer? High resolution interlaced mode. So you got to see double the amount of table, but at the cost of some serious flickering. But if you like seeing more of the board at all times, then there is an option to change to it, but I tend to prefer the lower resolution mode. The rest of this table is pretty much what you can expect from a DICE pinball game. There are multipliers for you to go for, areas to unlock, as well as some nice mini games like getting the gym going, which makes some great use of the bumpers. The final table is Extreme Sports, which has the heaviest music of all of their games. The 3 main ramps are all at the top, with that upper flipper being your main way to access them. and it seems that for all they added to the game, they also took away, as they removed the post that used to be at the bottom of the well, and that saved so many balls in the past. They also removed the number matching game at the end, so there's no easy way to try and win an extra ball. They also changed up the plunger, so it's now a single press button and launch the ball style of thing. I might be slightly old fashioned, but I always preferred the actual pulling back and releasing the ball. I think it's fair to say that they were starting to run out of inspiration for pinball games, because the first two games were amazing. With this one, it was just great. So it was good that in the same year someone else attempted to make a new game, which resulted in Pinball Prelude, which was developed and published by Effigy, and came with 3 tables: Past, Present, and Future. And as you might have guessed, we're currently looking at the Past table, with a very, very themed table, to the point where you can't really make out where some of those ramps and items really are. It looks nice enough and it moves really quickly, but that real lack of separation between the interactive elements and the board makes everything a lot harder than it needs to be. They also do a few things that you couldn't do on a real table. Like every so often these rodents will pop up and you'll have to try and hit them, and these can be random across the board. Or you can even go down this waterfall at the side. I did have a lot of fun playing this, but I do tend to prefer my pinball tables to look and act like real pinball tables, so I was worried that they were all going to be like this, and then I played the second table, the Present, and I was pleasantly surprised to find out that it looked and felt like a proper table. We have real ramps, bumpers, and lots of cool things for you to do. Like if you manage to get the ball round and into the top, you can get to watch a little game of football, with a nice little animation at the end to show you if you manage to get a goal or not. Or you can try and get it into the dish in the middle, where it will spin around and you can get some extra points. This is actually a really nice table, and possibly up there with some of the best. It's just a shame they didn't have a proper dot matrix board or something similar for the scoring, as just having some floating text really takes away from that pinball feeling, as does the last table, Future, which returns to the I have no idea what I'm looking at style of the first table. And this one is a right mess as well. There could be lots of things for you to do here, but just trying to work it out is way too much work. I like the idea of splitting the well at the bottom, it's quite cool. But when I can't work out what is the board and what's a bumper, they've failed. And it's a real shame that they only made one decent table out of this whole 3. And so finally we make it to 1997 with the release of Pinball Brain Damage. That was developed by Mind's Eye Entertainment, and after working through a very flashy menu, we find a game with just 2 tables. The first is Hyper Revolution, which seems to be some weird mix of cars and guns. And it's obviously got quite a few ramps, and it being a bit of a spaghetti junction in places as well. And we've returned to having a detailed dot matrix display for various animations. So all in all, things are looking up, but what is slightly odd is having to hit enter to launch the ball. Not return, but enter on the keypad. So if you do check this out, that's how you launch. The general movement of the ball feels good, if a little bit fast, but it does seem to bounce around quite nicely, and you can get a good head of speed up on it as well. And if you manage to get the right combination of buttons and slots, you might even be able to play some of the board games. Now the ones I managed to get were variations on having to hit the ramps, so as far as I'm aware it doesn't have any of those games that you actually play on the dot matrix display itself. I do enjoy its take on the number matching game at the end, as it's really nicely animated, even if the target number is a little difficult to make out. The second table is Magnetic Whirlpool, and I have to say this is a bit of a hard one to play, as so many of the targets are hidden, as well as the ramps. It can be quite difficult to work out what it is you need to do. Now, it's not quite to the extent of Pinball Prelude, but it isn't exactly cleanly laid out either, even if it does have some nice animations on the board itself with some of the wheels. But the best bit might have to be its skill challenge, as unlike the last table, this one allows you to set the power when you launch the ball, and in doing so you have to try and put it into the right slot to try and get your extra points. It is quite cool. And if those two tables weren't enough for you, then you're in luck, as they included a table editor with the game. You can place ramps and all manner of objects down on the board, though you can only set down a set number of pieces. Now, I've not had a chance to really play with this, but it does look very impressive, and I do wonder if they were more interested in making an editor than the game, based on the final tables that we got. But I will say, if you want to try out any of these, make sure you've set up your Amiga with lots of RAM, as it really will require it. And those are the main games. But as I like to cover an extra one where possible, I figured it might be quite interesting to check out a game that was given away free with the Amiga Fun magazine. And that was Reflexity Pinball Challenge. And before we talk about anything else, can we just bask in this title screen? The flippers for hands, the face, I mean chest hugger, as well as that hand being ready to grab our hero. This is a work of art. The game itself was included on the 12th issue in 1992, with High-Tech Studios being the developer. The very flash menus hides what is an old-style single-screen pinball game. And it's fair to say they probably had no idea that the pinball genre was about to change dramatically in that same year. So making a decent single-screen game was fine. And this one has a bunch of really neat touches, even if most of them aren't on the board itself. Like I like how the speaker moves with the sound effects. Or if you have music playing, it will go along with it instead. I also like that eyeball that follows the ball. The action itself seems mostly fine. The ball itself is a little bouncy for my liking, but you do get used to it, and the table has quite the number of targets and things for you to go for, including this magnet that will hold any ball that you launch up there, and it ends up acting like its multi-ball system. It's a fun little table, but I can see why it was given away free with the magazine. And there we have it, quite the number of games that showed how pinball evolved on the Amiga. This almost became a bit of a retrospective. And as always, I'd like to hear which game or table was your favourite. And if you think I've missed any great games, then let me know down in the comments. And until next time, I was the Goldfish, that was playing a mean game of pinball, and this was Goldfish on Games. Thank you for watching me play pinball badly. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, then I've done a few of these types of videos in the past, which you should be able to see a couple of links for. Or you could bounce off the buttons under the video to help the channel get a high score. Thank you again for watching, and I hope to see you soon.